So we will start with session 2, and we will completely change direction because we will deal with legal and regulatory challenges limiting the objectives that we decided upon on Monday morning. So the release of stats. So for this session, we will have Canadian Véronique Guèvremont. She is an expert in protection and promotion of cultural expression promotion, and she will help us demystify some aspects. She's a professor at the University Laval Law Faculty and Institute for Advanced International Studies. A graduate of the Université Paris 1 Panthéon-Sorbonne, she has been teaching World Trade Organization law and international cultural law since 2006. From 2003 to 2005, she was associate expert at the UNESCO Division of Cultural Policies during the negotiations toward the 2005 Convention on the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expressions. In 2008, she co-founded the Réseau International des Juristes pour la Diversité des Expressions Culturelles, RICHDEC, and has since led several studies. She regularly works with the UNESCO, the International Organization of la Francophonie, and with Québec's Ministère des Relations Internationales de la Francophonie and Ministère de la Culture et des Communications. She recently joined UNESCO's expert facility for the implementation of the 2005 Convention and was appointed UNESCO Chair in Diversity of Cultural Expressions, whose activities will be officially launched in 2016. So you have the floor. Thank you. So what a wonderful panel, and the one I have the opportunity of leading regarding legal and regulatory challenges. We have quite a few of them. We already dealt with them earlier on. Well, we find them at different scales at the national level, obviously, with this reflection that we have to lead as to the renewal of cultural policies in the digital age, but also on the opportunity of developing completely new cultural policies. This is something we've been touching upon over the past 2 days. Maybe the sectors are being confounded more and more when we deal with cultural policies, whereas in the past at this level we had ecosystems, very well-established ecosystems that recognize the role of actors and stakeholders. So do we have to remove everything and create a new reflection way in terms of supporting cultural production? So not only at the national level, but also at the international level, we have to reflect on this. I've been interested in the implementation of interested by the Convention of the UNESCO regarding the protection of cultural expressions and products. So this convention aims at recognizing the right of different states to implement policies to support cultural expression of their own countries. So nowadays we still wonder within this convention about the role of the states in this digital era. So we've already mentioned that this morning. The different bodies of the convention do develop an operational transversal document on this, and I guess the panel that we have today is really very appropriate. So we will listen to what you have to say, because we are still looking for new inspirations, new ideas in order to guide at the international level in the framework of the implementation of said convention, to guide the different states in order that those states renew their cultural policies. I don't want to take too much time, but I guess it's not only a challenge, but there is an emergency. We know that this convention was negotiated to create a counterweight to what's being done at the international trade level, where the states do take commitments which may limit their role in terms of cultural sectors. Throughout the years, we developed some techniques to preserve our intervention control and controlling power. For the traditional techniques, very often we have very limited commitments or even reservation highlighted by the states because they want to keep control on the cultural sector. However, nowadays, what do we want to keep? What kind of a control we want to keep when we are thinking about developing our cultural policies? Over the past few years, we find out that in terms of e-commitments, we have many constraints and very not enough prudence or caveats to preserve this same intervention space. Maybe because at the national level we don't know what to preserve, what to control, what we want to do in order to keep supporting the culture in the future. So without further ado, I will give the floor to you. So this panel is made of 3 experts. Philippe Chantepie from the Ministry of Culture and Communication in France. You've already heard him, so I'm not going to describe his bio. The same with André Lange, independent expert. Thank you very much for being here. I will just introduce to you Paul-Éric Mosseray, who is the director of the digital transition at the Conseil, supérieur de l'audiovisuel of Belgium. Since 2014, he coordinates the work related to audiovisual services regulation in the context of the digital transition. He also acts as a consultant to various entities of the Council of Europe, the European Union, and professional or advisory bodies. Over the past few years, he has focused more specifically on the future of FM radio, subject matter and territorial jurisdiction in relation to regulation, access to and visibility of audiovisual services and content, as well as new online public services. He holds a license in communications from the University of Louvain. Previously, he worked as a radio coordinator, advertising producer, and secretary of the Private Radio Federation before joining the cabinet of the Minister-President of the Fédération while in Brussels, where he was in charge of managing private radios, public film subsidies, and consumer protection and television production and broadcasting support policies. He also worked for the Minister of the FWB, focusing on the contribution of television to cultural and audiovisual creation and to media pluralism. So without further ado, I do give the floor to Mr. Philippe Chantecloux. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot to Dominique Jutras and the organizers to invite me to think about these issues, and mainly on legal and regulatory challenges regarding whether cultural big data and surrounding the relationships between the treatment of the processing of big data and the usual public works. I heard yesterday and this morning that the people are quite surprised in front of cultural means, maybe because of the difficulties related to access. But I guess that the different tastes do reflect better the identity and sociability of the individuals. Also, cultural consumption and practices are an object of communication. So for the first time, maybe we have a knowledge and some information as to the users, consumers, but also creators, which had never in the past been done. So we may be faced with challenges at the public level, which has quite a very far-stretched approach, and then we have many different data holders and creators. So challenges are quite different. First of all, there's not so much challenges related to public stats. We may still work with public stakeholders, individuals, companies may make surveys that help public powers to decide upon their action. We can also study the different methodologies. in this field. So paradoxically, what's really more challenging are the big data producers. They have too many data that are not really assets. I'm going to give you a few examples I know about. They have a very small framework regarding public power related to the statistic secrets, and there is a major risk. That's why I was talking about this earlier on. They can talk about everything, but with a lot of fragmentation of the information, not only related to a country, but the whole set of users, and that's an issue at the public level. That's why big data are very challenging for the producers. So at the same time, we have a renewal of challenges. I'm going to deal only with legal issues here. I would like to mention some economic issues. Cultural big data, if you look at, well, that's only one actor among many of them. If you look at the different stakeholders, this is what we have as the figures regarding the big data figures. And for the culture, it's only 30% of the global set. So it's important for the economy. At the same time, those big data are quite hard to assess. This is a map that was led by the ACNIL, the National Commission on Computing and Liberty in France. They were assessing cultural big data. As you can see, there is a fragmentation of potential producers. We may have an exploded localization of data between producers and creators. I don't know whether you can see that, but there is also a polarization around the different broadcasters, depending on the works, editing work. So we have a very good approach as to the consumers, but then on the other side you have other categories, and one category of actors, the one of mobile phone producers, but those different categories are competing each other, and there is no possible cooperation to have a global vision of all the cultural practices. That's the same for the economy. If you also look at the polarization surrounding platforms, and on the other side, the makers such as Amazon, Google, Apple, etc., they have a double source of information, and they do not want to share it. We also have in the assessment of this data some actors or stakeholders who can also give an idea as to the consumption data, including in the cultural field. They have a lot of information regarding the data, and they bring a lot of information that can be processed for marketing and economic purposes. We can see that. Still working on the ACNIL works. As you can see, in nature of data, there is no unification. It's quite a fragmented area. That's one of the challenges we are being faced with, but very important data regarding the future of the use, data regarding the commitment of consumers, very strong at the cultural level, and dealing with the identity of the different individuals. All those data are at the core of the machinery of platforms, which is the dominating driver. The terms of exchanges, the capital surrounding the consumption, it has a prescription value very relevant. It's an economic value which is quite crucial. So let's, turning back to the legal challenges, we have a renewal of challenges. We didn't have those issues in the past in the analogical world, but now with the digital platform emergence, we have many such challenges. So two moves. First of all, the big data, the commercial ones, cultural ones, are more and more protected. Those are obviously trade data. They are protected we had a new directive on TRIPS and the protection of the know-how and the companies. Those data are only valuable if they are being worked with algorithm. So it's an essential element that have to be protected by the legislation. They are also protected if you look at the trade-related intellectual property rights. We have also databases protecting them. We also have the copyright rights and the other rights that will protect more and more access to those big data. So it's an immaterial or intangible asset that is protected, the big data. So we have maybe an issue with a different logical between the public stats and the private stats or assessment of data regarding those actors. Regarding the public in Europe and in France, we are in a logic of open data and the wider access possible, but also a logical of states opposed to the privatization of cultural data use. On the other hand, we have public stacks dealing with the longer term and the repetition of surveys, but we also have a fragmentation of the different data related to the market data, which is quite traditional when you look at the survey agencies and opinion poll agencies. So those are contrary or opposed logics. On the other hand, you have different methodologies at the European or international levels, but we also have business-led methodologies, which lead us to different issues we've been dealing with in France and which are not related only to digital. For instance, the Observatoire de la Musique, so for music, which was working with GFK, an institute, until the day that the producer decided they wanted to control the data use. So they reached an agreement, and then the observatory was afterwards unable to produce the specific data that they had access to in the past, so that we have a bigger concurrence at that level. Regarding that, at the beginning of the 2000s, the observatory started working on this field until Apple really grew within the streaming and started to refuse to provide public data regarding this. So in other words, the public observatory can no longer work on those data. So we have legal challenges that we are being faced with. Among the different challenges, two very important. One, the personal data challenge. In France, we do raise attention to this data. Also elsewhere in Europe, there are some surveys in Europe too. It's not that much protected in the US, and it's even worse in Japan. But rather in France, we keep strengthening the regulation as to privacy data and cultural data. So this may slow down the exploitation or assessment of data. If you look at France in particular, the control that is made through the declaration and statements, but also the physical control is quite important regarding the data processing, the preservation of data, storage of data, security and confidentiality or privacy of this data. If you look at the European level and its regulation actually that was implemented over the past few weeks and should be implemented before 2018, we are strengthening the protection of the data, and it should limit the control of the big data producers. I will only mention one of these, the extension of the user rights to the portability of services. In other words, the multi-homing, you change platform and you compete with other ones. So it's a protection tool, and it's also an element of competition that is quite relevant. This limits the issue of big data and the situation we may feel towards those big data, because their use will be limited on a longer-term basis, and those analyses actually are related to those companies and their customers. So what do we do at the legal level to improve the knowledge we have regarding those big data? We mentioned some things in the morning regarding the artistic and literature copyrights. Actually, we can have access to all the different information related to the companies. It belongs to the state and has never been used in the past by the different states. What I used to do, we can sign agreements. We've done that with an agency protecting authors in France, but then I did not sign any agreement with a SACEM that wants to keep hold on the data. So maybe we can work at that level. And it's very important actually to know some information. So maybe we have to work at the legal level to develop databases. There is also the extension of data that are already provided by access providers for an agency in France. But we can also extend the access to this data at the public or private level. Let's think about Spotify or Google. I'm sorry, it was not EI. But we also have standardization issues that are important too. Among the different legislation goals or legal challenges we are being faced with, we should be able to develop standardization approaches through regulatory bodies or labelization, as the ACNIL is doing regarding the different prescription tools or audience rating measurements, so we can use those methodologies. We could also charge those requirements and require the companies to provide public agencies the required data. On the other hand, we can develop research partnerships. For instance, an agency developed a very efficient tools regarding the use of the web, so researchers can work on what is being done on the internet thanks to technological innovative tools. Another example, Sciences Po is going to work in that field and sign some agreements with private stakeholders. Another example, with Deezer or Daily Mission, we can sign agreements with them in order to work on research objectives. And also, and I will stop here, there is an important work between public statistic agencies, researchers, and private companies to do. So regarding the economy of retention in the digital area, which supposes higher collaboration in order to understand the data. As long as you do not question the whole area of data, those have no value at all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Philippe Chantepie, for your presentation. That contains very interesting ideas. Maybe we will see some common elements with the next presentations. One thing that I took away from your presentation was the proposal for the development of regulation, and more specifically to develop legal obligations to supply information. And I know when it comes to applying standards, we have to see the territorial scope. This can be applied to some actors in a given territory, but when the actors are in a foreign territory, the efficiency might not be that great. I think the whole question of territoriality might be approached in the next presentations. I'd now like to hand over the floor to Mr. André Lange. Good morning. Thank you for this third opportunity to speak. Last November, when the scientific committee met here to organize the symposium, I suggested to have a representative of the European Commission responsible of new services and digital content at the European Commission, and who's also in charge of the Audiovisual Media Service Directive. I'll explain why she had to decline my invitation. Because the proposal on this directive should be deposited next month, and her entire team is mobilized on this effort. I'm not here to replace the European Commission. That is not my mandate. And I would like to move a little bit away from some of the proposals made by the European Union. In a nutshell, I would like to explain the role of the Audiovisual Media Services Directive in European productions and what this involves at the data level. And I also like to cover the evolution of regulation and how this can reduce the significant financial support of some states to audiovisual production, or also the decline in data availability, and I will explain why I'm so pessimistic. The revision of the Audiovisual Media Services Directive is part of a debate at the EU. We are debating a plan on a single market, or a digital single market. We also have strong debates on geo-blocking. Mrs. Benamou will probably talk about this on the debate on intellectual property, so I won't focus on that too much. We also have consultations on electronic communications. There are consultations on IATC standards. There are also consultations on regulatory environments and also on the realities of cloud computing. There's also the consultations on GAFA. We have proposals and consultations on various taxes for cultural goods and services. There's also the proposal of the Commission to strengthen the obligation for multinationals to show more financial transparency. Philippe has spoken about the protection of trade secrets, but also the protection of whistleblowers. There are debates on the place of electronic services within the FTA agreements with the U.S., and we could add to that, and I forgot to put it in my list, the midterm assessment of the Europe Creative Program, also the significant cases of studies, notifications, or grievances of the European Commission towards Google that have implications on transparency, on also their dominating position. I'd like to focus on the AVMS directive. Since 2007, it is the extension of the former directive on television services without borders that went back to 1989. This extended the application scope of the directive to audiovisual media services. I won't go through the objectives of the directive, but it's interesting to see, maybe not in the text, but in the communication documents. The European Commission stated as first goal technological progress. Second objective, to create a level playing field for new actors, and the promotion of cultural diversity in the third place. And it is ahead of protection of pluralism, and also above protection of minors, and also the fight against religious and cultural minority hatred. So promotion of cultural diversity is included in the text. If we look at the debates between regulators and national policies, aside from a few countries, including the one that I'm proud to belong to, for his case Belgium and my case France, some countries do not promote cultural diversity in their policy priorities. In terms of on-demand audiovisual media services, not all audiovisual media services on internet, but the ones that are on demand and catch-up television services, but not video newspaper contents. Some lobbies want to make sure that this is excluded from the directive. Section 13 of the directive talks about the promotion of European audiovisual products with 3 proposals. The presence of these works in catalogs, which I've spoken about yesterday, the prominence of European works, and the contribution of service editors to work promotion through funding mechanisms. This poses an implementation issue. In principle, governments have to transmit application reports to the European Commission. The most recent report from the European Commission goes back to 2010, which is almost prehistoric. There was a report in 2011 published by the Commission presenting work from a private consultant. And a few weeks ago, the European Commission published various reports published by the Audiovisual European Observatory that are available online for free. About work promotion and the obligation of exposure in navigation systems and the presentation of catalog segments in on-demand services. There are some countries that have implemented this in a precise way, and we have assessment reports for France. CSA has published in February 2015 a report showing the application of these obligations by different types of services, catch-up television. And we can see that only 11% of actors have not respected these obligations. It's quite easy for them because usually for national television broadcasters, they can put their own productions on their websites. For subscription television, 30% of the actors have not respected their obligations. And for VOD and transactional services, 11% have not respected their obligations. The French community Wallonie-Bruxelles, I respect the right of the Belgian community to use whatever designation they want. We will use French community Wallonie-Bruxelles to make it easier for us to know what we're talking about. Paul-Éric will cover that part, so I won't go through the figures. And the Audiovisual European Observatory has published a comparative study between France, Germany, and Great Britain, analyzing the way the 3 countries, the services in these countries have respected their obligations. Let me come back to one aspect that I find important. the whole question of investment obligation or contribution to the national cinema funds that exist in various countries. And in my opinion, these would be threatened by the principle of the country of establishment. It is the regulation of the country where the service is established that would be considered. The principle behind this obligation of contribution exists in about 10 countries of the EU. If you'd like more detail on this, I would like to refer to you a report that we published last year for the EU. This type of obligation stems from television regulation that is either related to investment obligations of broadcasters in the production, either in pre-production or pre-purchase. And this exists in several European countries. This allows us to obtain figures like the ones published by CNC in Spain. Mainly pay TV and cable operators contribute to these funds. We also have some figures that are not as detailed for Italy. The principle that existed for television was transferred to on-demand audiovisual media services, which is the case in France. The CSA has published implementation reports on its obligations by on-demand audiovisual media services. For some services that reach a certain level of sales, there are only 3 or 4 services that are forced to contribute to these funds. And our figures are not as specific in 2013 than for the previous years. There's another type of intervention that exists in other countries. That is the obligations to contribute to the National Film Fund, which is a former system that came from a former obligation towards movie theater operators that was spread to different distributors and also cable operators. In some countries, this was also applied to physical video distributors and in some cases of on-demand video editors. This is the case for Germany, France, and Portugal. I find, let me skip a few slides because you can find this in my written document. This is where I see that there are risks related to the free circulation of services that are based on the country of establishment. The free circulation of television services has had an impact in Europe. Paul-Éric will explain the impact on smaller countries such as Belgium, Scandinavian countries, Austria, Ireland, but not on the larger countries. The free circulation of on-demand TV services has an impact on the larger countries because these services are established in Luxembourg or in the Netherlands or in Czech Republic, where the investment and contribution obligations do not exist. And this creates a disbalance between national operators that have obligations and their competitors that are established in other European countries or in the US that aren't forced to do the same contributions. There was a demand formulated by the main operators to reduce their contribution obligations and also to reduce the amount of data available. A political response was suggested by Germany and France in national regulation aiming to allow taxation of services established in foreign countries, but the Commission has blocked these mechanisms, waiting for the review of the directive, which is underway. Personally, by analyzing the power relationships, Paul-Éric, who is closer to the debates than I am, might be more optimistic, but I don't think that there was a lot of progress in this area. In the next 5 to 10 years, I believe that there will be a weakening of these contribution systems. I apologize, I had to shorten my presentation, but all my presentation will be available with the various references to official texts from the Observatory and the European Commission that I will make available to you.
Thank you, André Lange. You covered various areas, starting with data, and I recognize that you left the cultural realm to say that there were things that were being done elsewhere, some models that could be used to implement the authority and the data to collect to companies, and this is something that bears exploring. And on the issue of the review of the directive on audiovisual media, there are some proposals that are quite interesting, but as a specialist of international trade, that strikes me. Could there be a risk of discrimination? For example, you're talking of having a European content in catalogs, perhaps, but there is a preeminence. You're talking of a primacy that I wonder, can we really go that way? And same thing regarding contribution from companies that are abroad. We could say, well, if it is the same contribution for everybody, then there's no discrimination. But will those companies will be able to use this funding? And perhaps there might be some discrimination there. So this raises some nice issues, some nice proposals, but all this falls into the context of another regulation, which is trade regulation, and that is perhaps and that limits perhaps the freedom that we have. So we may be able to discuss this. Now I'm giving the floor to Paul-Éric Mosseray. Thank you. Good hello to everybody. I would like to thank the Observatoire de la Communication to invite me here, because I believe that the regulation of audiovisual are disciplines that are interdependent, and I was very, very interested to follow the work since the beginning of the sessions. I'm going to give you the point of view of an audiovisual regulation that is going to depart from quantification to talk about a regulation, but that has an impact, of course, on the quantification. So we are an independent administrative authority of audiovisual regulation, and we are in charge for the French part of Belgium, and I'm going to use a Fédération Wallonie-Bruxelles, but we're talking about the same thing as a French community. In audiovisual regulation, quantification has been inactive for 30 years, and in radio there are some broadcasting quotas for French music and local productions. In TVs we have production broadcasting for European work and French work, and there has the same quotas for TV and radio, plus some more specific quotas. And I would say more recently it is regulations of cultural obligations that is applied to on-demand video, in, for example, exposure of European and French productions, and production quotas. And in the actors that we're talking, these are the service distributors. who are subject to intervening in funding of production. All these measures are being shared in all European countries and the world, but in disparate ways. It is connected to constitutional or political concepts that do not all recognize the proportionality to restrict the production, and they think that they can reach quotas or cultural objectives by means others than quotas. And for example, here I found a study that was made by the CRTC in radio, CRTC, and you can see that in blue, among European countries, well, there are some differing quotas, starting with France, which is the most intense quotas, and with certain European countries that have no quotas in radio. And for example, we have the quota of Canada in yellow, and some examples of other countries, of Australia and South America. Regarding quotas in TV of European work or European productions, and we have a directive, we can see it the same way. There are some countries have transposed these quotas in different ways. For example, we have some exceptions and some flexible approaches in Europe. 9 member states have certain conditions for which the objective should not be reached systematically, and finally 14 states have a more strict approach without any flexibility. The same okay, I went here a bit fast here. The same issue it raises regarding the control, which varies from one member country to another. Certain member countries want to transmit the execution reports that are provided by TVs. Others check those reports, or other countries monitor those reports. And so the approaches vary, and to come back to some issues that are closer to our concern here today, the promotion or the exposure of European works. We can see that some member countries have transposed the directive in variable ways, and you can see that from going to the left to right, certain countries have applied specific rules in each of the categories, quota, exposure, and contribution to production, and other countries have elected to be active in one approach or have transposed very, very loosely. And I would like to show you and the quality of the quantification quality, and that is very, very important for the effectiveness of the regulation. For example, in Brussels, it is remarkable to see the impact of a control instrument that we started in 2008 to see that. From the red stick, from the level of delegation, here you can see that year after year, following a control and specific controls, the monitoring based on reliable statistics was at the basis of constituted the basis of public policy. So that was important to say. It is the same thing for the quotas of production, of musical production. And before covering various challenges, we should perhaps understand which are the actors that are concerned by regulation. So, for example, the decree or the executive order describes what comes into audiovisual regulation. So there's audiovisual media service have to fulfill some criteria. First, it has to be published under the editorial responsibility of a publisher. Its main focus must be in the audiovisual, and it's meant for televisual programs, and it is also enlarged to radio. And those 3 criteria are under pressure in the new environment, the new online environment, and also the executive order defines the geographical area to which these services apply, and these are services which meet 2 of the 3 criteria that are mentioned in red. So, for example, the headquarters and the place where the editorial decision the publishing decision is taken, and where we have most of the employees are the criteria, and when you have 2 of those 3 criteria, the service is connected to that host country. And finally, the executive order is specific, and the regulation in Brazil has three functions of the value chain. For example, the publisher and the distributor and the operator, the network operators. So let us talk about the distinction between a publisher and distributor. The publisher is a physical person or organization assuming editorial responsibility of audiovisual media service content and determines how the content is being organized. And the distributor is a person that distributes. And so we are talking here the responsibility, the publishing responsibility is carried by the publisher and not by the distributor. And we're talking in all the laws, depending whether it is radio or TV, whether it is linear or non-linear. And this is, and then more specifically regarding our concern, it has to be on an open or closed platform. And the closed platform is that where you need a program of publishing, so it is through boxes. And the open platform, it is a broadcasting free, and this is of course this is mostly internet. And so what you see is that most of this toolbox, it's a bit complex, allows us to define the architecture of cultural requirements. And here you can see all the requirements that are common to all services or specific to some services. And in the two charts that follow, you can see that, for example, implementation of audiovisual production, chronology, and copyright that applies to all productions, that is linear or non-linear, that is on an open or closed platform. And depending on whether it is one platform category or another, the categories of requirements is more or more constraining and adapted to the specific situation. It's the same thing for radio regarding cultural obligations, where you can see that that services that are broadcasting on a closed platform on FM are more constrained to and have more quotas and participation and creation. Just to say that the regulation is being made on most of the services regarding the broadcasting platform, as long as it is audiovisual services, and this regulation is gradual, and this intensity depends on the degree of the distributor, be it linear or not, and or on the restrictive character of broadcasting. And so in those non-linear services, and this is of course the conclusion and the consequence of this, we have services on-demand services and services on the internet that are subject to gradual regulation. Now, for the service distributor, this is a person that publicizes those services. It is essentially cable services, services of distribution that is being made on bifilar cable, on terrestrial distribution, or things that are accessible directly on the internet in closed platforms that are established in federation in Brazil for the second part of this list. This constellation of distributors, well, we have some regulations that apply to them that has to do with production. And for example, in the relation between content suppliers and distributors, well, there are some frameworks that apply to the distributor for, like, for example, negotiation of fees, the must carry, and support to production. And you can see that the executive order has created a new category of actors that does have some publishing responsibility, and but is also responsible, that translates into some requirements in terms of culture. And for example, the contribution of contribution of distributors to production. Now I'm coming to the challenges. The first being the question of how to keep in the realm of culture and the measures, the services, the online services. The first issue is the issue of exemption of responsibility of intermediaries. So as I was saying, the policies that are connected to the cultural diversity are connected to the entity that exercises the publishing responsibility. But in Europe, the intermediaries, as for example, integrator, are exempted from responsibility because of the directive on electronic commerce. But some countries have used some other texts to build a specific requirement and accessibility and of the programs to present and investment to production. And you can see, and I think this is a complete list of European countries that has a specific status for audiovisual. And now we have two new intermediaries beyond traditional distributors come. So we can see all the legal logos of all the services on request. We have Radio Key. They are declared to the Federation of Brussels, and so they are subject to regulation, but they are being distributed on various platforms that are not traditional, like for example, video sharing, Dailymotion video on musical platforms, Brief and SoundCloud, and connected television interface like Samsung. And also for now, are not part of this realm or perimeter services that broadcast audiovisual broadcast that is made by private producers. For example, YouTube is not part of it. So what can you see on this platform? Well, there's progressive intervention through recommendation, and here these are the automatic that you can find on YouTube that are produced through algorithms and recommendations. And what you also find that those platforms like YouTube have branch outs, and here I put here the new channel Recette Pompette, and that ignited a debate in France where the producer said that after having tried to broadcast this on the traditional chain, and he thought that by putting on internet he would not be subjected to legislation forbidding using the prohibition of promotion of alcohol on screen. And so what you see here on a platform like YouTube is that now they have some offers of pay-per-view videos. If you see, for example, there's a print screen here, and in reality it is a channel of films, and when you're looking for information in apropos, there is no publisher that is indicated. And so the proposal of the CSA is to create a category with others, a new category, that would cover audiovisual platforms, and the category in which some rules on access would apply, and the promotion of European, and it would be some new rules that could be applied. The second issue is that to appreciate differently the requirements, given that the moving images are assimilable to TV. Well, for the time being, to be audiovisual, you need programs like TV-like. So some motion picture, something that is similar or comparable to TV. Well, here are some examples. You have to the left some short programs like Caméra Café. They're short programs who have had 2 million viewers on Canal, and those programs are incorporated in audiovisual services that are part of the regime. And onto the right you have what is considered like a content that is generated by users, that where we have YouTubers like Norman, 7 million subscribers. The Belgium equivalent doesn't have the same success with 78,000 viewers. So here's a question that is being asked here, a new problem. Should we consider distinctively services given that they are close of content or the style of TV, I see that the examples speak for themselves, and in this context, the CSA proposed to review this criteria of proximity and to take consider the impact on the viewers. And the last example of criteria that is restrictive, and for example, this is the case of the status of radio. Of course, the surveys in France show that the radio is the preferred media for the French, but some complementary studies based on age show that the progression in terms of music consumption is, of course, in stark progression, but these platforms are not covered by this regulation. And so this objective is the radio, and you want to extend the jurisdiction to radio. Another category is the issue of the territorial jurisdiction. How keep under the jurisdiction of countries that determine their cultural services that are on their territory, but that are done outside of their territory. So to take the example of Belgium, you can see here that in traditional TV, we have different types of connection. For example, in this pie chart, you can see that what is in red and yellow are TV services that are meant, in terms of content, are meant for the Brussels public, but it is produced outside of Brussels. In gauche, to the left, you can see the audience compared to the audience. And the pie chart in the middle shows their viewing if you only use the services that are established in Brussels area. And the pie chart to the right shows you the result in terms of market share. And these services have 70% of the resources on which you calculate the contribution to the production. We can see that there are some same problems when you look at the number of countries that have the European hubs. These are the figures of the numbers of TVs that operate in certain countries, but that are meant for other markets. We did some work here. I have some statistics here on the impact in terms of viewing in the target countries. So countries like Belgium, Slovenia, Poland, and many other countries see a part a bit of from 10 to 40% or 50% of their market is done by services that are on their territory. I'm not talking about the international services or pan-European that are active on many territories, but those target services. And here the effect of having services, target services, is not a problem. But it becomes a problem when in that country the situation shows some imbalance in services depending on whether it is in that country or not. So what is the impact of all this? Sorry, this situation is the same for video on demand, and this is true on 1,600 video on demand that exists. Well, 600 of those are established on the host country, 400 are in another European country, and 460 or more are in the United States, and 111 are in another European country. So this shows you the intensity of the viewer target that is important. And so the result is that you have a very, very important impact, as it was seen in Belgium and also in most of the 28 European countries in terms of financing for production, of cultural diversity and contribution to production. And what we're explaining here is a new balance between cultural diversity and freedom of circulation and freedom of establishment in the internal market. And so one of the approaches could be and this is the object of our talks right now, is to review the procedures and the criteria of connection to one country to improve the avoidance process that doesn't exist now, and a change of approach. But this is, of course, the most difficult issue on the target country. I am concluding now on the last challenge that we could talk together. It is a question of visibility and access to content of public interest. Here is some work that we did at the CSA, where we work on a limited corpus to compare the shares and the European productions in video on demand catalogs, and we measured, for example, the European works in those catalogs and the outcome in terms of top. That means in the viewing of those productions. There are 4 years of evaluation, and you can see that there is an impact, an important impact, or significant, or an important one, of the intensity of the promotion in 2014. You can see clearly that there is a good progression of exposure of European production, had some effect on the viewing of those production, and this could open a conversation that we could have on the way we can estimate the standards on which are resting political procedures should evolve also in online environment. This is a case for exposure of the promotion, and it is also a case for issues of access to content of public interest online, with the essential issue that is, for these issues, the approach and the use, more systematic use of recommendation system, and the questions that it poses in terms of transparency, visibility of content of public interest, and the impact in terms of pluralism and concentration, because what the new operators believe is that the prescription of algorithm is a mechanic publisher's choice that is not subject to any rule, and so it is not possible for them to make any exceptions to the exclusivity of this publishing, even mechanic. So it is an important talk that is directly connected to the use of big data. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul-Éric Mosseray. You really wrapped up not only your own presentation, because you started with quota, and we may wonder about their use in the digital era, which leads us to the protection of the diversity of cultural expressions. Can we still protect the digital expression within the digital era? Shouldn't we adopt some incentives in terms of visibility? But you also wrapped up very well with Mr. Chantepie's presentation when you mentioned recommendation systems, and I noted the risk of manipulation that you mentioned, manipulation of data, and obviously we may wonder whether at the visibility level, and given the opacity of private companies regarding those data and the way they are manipulated, so maybe we have a risk, we are running a risk of manipulating audiences. And so what would be the state role in order to limit this hazardous manipulation factor? So we have some 10 minutes to answer your questions or comments. I'm convinced that you have some. In such a case, I will ask you to get to the mic, and our panelists are here to answer them. Good morning. I just would like to check with my colleagues in Quebec and Canada whether they understood the same way Mr. Mosseray's presentation regarding the application or implementation of the different guidelines regarding VOD for online services. What is not being done here? We know that on internet, the CRTC doesn't have any regulation. So, and it's interesting, I don't know whether you realized properly what was mentioned by Mr. Mosseray. And actually my question to you is, did you assess the lack of benefits
à faire peut-être, mais de manque à gagner par rapport au fait que
regarding
territorialité
the territoriality of service distributors which are not in Belgium? So is there a lack of funds, of income at that level, since the abroad-based providers are not abiding by the Belgium regulations? So maybe for the content protection there is a lack of income as compared to nationally based producers. Do you want to answer? Yes, as I mentioned, we calculated the lack of income in the natural world, because we know the figures explaining what's the captured market regarding advertisement. So that's the way we assess this 70%. For the on-demand services, obviously it's not as easy, because as our colleague from France mentioned yesterday, even though they were able to calculate some figures, but for Netflix, those are only estimations. So the appropriate number of Netflix subscribers is not available in order for us to understand the intensity of audiovisual platforms as compared to, I'd say, available services in Belgium. We have figures that are available for Belgium only related to single visitors or users of Dailymotion, YouTube, music platforms, etc. And then simultaneously online services on the male Belgium market. And it's fascinating, actually. As you know, I already gave you too much information. I apologize, but I had a slide. I don't know whether I'll be able to find it. No, but I'll give it to you later on. But YouTube has, I'd say, per single visit per month in November 2015, we had like some 3 million hits. For Dailymotion, it's a little bit less than 1 million. So as for Netflix, we have the number of clicks on Netflix, but not the users. But then we also have information regarding online services based on main radio broadcasters services users. So there is a huge disparity, but that's a challenge to really calculate the exact figures. As I mentioned, there is a required cooperation between the measurement and the implementation of policy action. So that's one of the main objectives, as our colleague mentioned yesterday from the CNC. Did you want to add anything? André, Lange? Well, actually, the issue of delocalization of distribution or broadcasting platforms is an issue that we are addressing in Belgium, but not at the European level, even though some countries are addressing it. And I'm thinking about Italy, for instance, where I attended several discussions and debates. For instance, the Media 7 Berlusconi's broadcaster focused on the fact that YouTube is on the same market as themselves, the advertisement market, and they use some things from Media 7. But for them, it's rather an advertisement competitor, and actually legal lawyers are mentioning that iTunes and other channels are not being regulated, which is not really a very good understanding of the directive. Actually, the European directive is neutral for platforms, so whatever the broadcasting means, whether through channel, through internet, are supposed to be regulated in the same fashion. There is also the issue of application catalogs on sports TV, such as Samsung. Actually, I tried to check the management, the catalog management localization, because Samsung provides services as well, but I was told that's a trade secret. Just one specification regarding Mr. Jutra's question, just to give you specific cases. Actually, Netflix at the European level is a VOD service that really should abide by the European directive. Hence, this service, by creating a branch in Europe, is supposed to abide by the European Union regulation. That is the situation. But Netflix situation is supposed to be different from YouTube, where the editing responsibility in terms of selection and organization varies a lot more, as I mentioned, and that's where raises the question actually regarding tangible assets. I guess some specification have been given as to the perimeter of such a scope of the regulation. Thank you. We still have some time for 2 questions. Maybe I see somebody who would like to ask a question. Maybe if there is another member, you can get to the mic. So good morning, Claude Martin. It would be rather a comment. We may wonder why some techniques or technologies are developing or not. And in the digital area, we may wonder why there is such a fast explosion, such a boom. It changes the relationships between the different actors, specifically between the states and the companies, and it creates escapes for the different stakeholders, powerful ones, to capture an advertisement market without respecting the regulations. We had the same questions in the past with the printing industry. So how come is it that we have such a boom? And the reason why we have such a boom is because it helps company finding ways of not abiding by the legislation. And it's a very powerful system, I say. Thank you. Philippe Chantepie, you would like to react? Well, maybe I can try to explain what's characteristic in this digital area. What we've noticed over the past 10 years, it was what I mentioned in my presentation. It's a model that's been very well explained by the economic theories. In other words, we have some stakeholders between 2 different markets, but they are being opaque. They don't really explain anything about the prices. Unless regulatory or competition bodies intervene, generally speaking, they think that iTunes Live in France, when they had 50% of the market share, they think that nothing may justify them to have 70%, and actually they were wrong. They preferred the uninviting platform that's really facilitating the increase of the competence. That's different with Google. We already had issues in the past. I guess the main vector is the whole economic platform structure that is different to the assessment of the prices, measurement of prices, which may have extraterritorial virtues, not taking into account the different stakeholders' mean character. Last question, yes? José Plamondon, I work in the data industry of cultural content and digital content. So my question relates to the data. you talk a lot about regulations related to the content, but what happens to the data related to the content? Not only big data, descriptive metadata, but the data describing said data. How can we regulate them when we know that the different models implemented in order to capture the value do not relate only the data value coming from personal data, but rather the whole content? So we may control those content, but also the other models of values that develop constantly around the single informational value of this information availability regarding the content. Here we may refer to Google. You can check Google data from 2014, who was the best actor for the Oscar in 2014 and 2015, etc. So to find the outcome, the relationship from one result to the other, through what we understood, because we understood how to work with related data, linked data. But that's only an iceberg. We have only the tip of the iceberg, but underneath there is the whole revolution related to the mastering or controlling of the data. How can you regulate this? Because it's very liquefied, I'd say. It's not tangible. Data is moving, flowing very fast. I guess this was mentioned earlier on by somebody who was part of an authors society. So I know the International Confederation of Authors and Composers Society worked around the end of the 90s regarding separation of ADM by having some systems describing the data upstream before the implementation of the system. So just to take an example, in France, this work was being done for record producers and mainly related to the reproduction rights. So if you look at the functioning of the RM, it starts with the data descriptions. For instance, in the American legislation, they do not recognize artists or performers. So in the fact of the computing information, so from the digital to the music industry, we don't know anything. So if you follow up the development of the music industry, the fact that performers did not receive any remuneration at the beginning of the digital platform advent, it's because there was no existence at the computer level or digital level. So it's important in terms of potential remuneration, but also visibility. So this shows that the relationship, strength relationship does not go upstream, but it goes towards intermediaries. It was the case in the past with producers, disseminators, broadcasters, etc. So the answer, we have to standardize the market. Yes, in order to do so, we have to develop a policy. Actors or stakeholders may do so, but they have to their awareness has to be raised, actually. Did you want to add something? Yes. Generally speaking, regarding the data access regulation issue, well, actually, I couldn't do that while I was working with the observatory, but actually I did send some documents regarding the consultation on the directive at the European level. When I'm promoting European legislation for more transparency in the name of the different transaction users. Actually, the different stakeholders have to explain, to give some figures regarding the film industry, but the video on demand stakeholders do not have to. So the Europe told me, well, on what basis of the treaty can we do that? I'm not a legal advisor, but I know that we can copy the bank's legislation. Maybe we could adopt some transparency legislation in the rest of the different sectors, stakeholders. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot to every panelist. We will stop here. Congratulations.
Merci beaucoup. Oui, oui. Alors, comme je l'avais dit,
yes,
on va
as I mentioned, now we will
réfléchir tous ensemble aux
think
actions
for the next half hour about the different actions that may be taken,
aussi en même temps de
maybe summarize as well the different debates. So I will ask Mr. Jutra.
Bonjour tout le monde, merci.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for staying. Following our experience yesterday at 12, some people thought it would be a good idea to use this opportunity to continue the debate, to continue the discussion between the panelists, between the audience. We might change up the formula today, however, and we'd like to focus our discussion on areas of action. We have made some observations, we have made some statements, and many presenters have presented facts, perspectives, yet our symposium has some objectives and also some expectations. I would like to know if you have some areas of action that you wish to express. We will make sure this discussion period is informal. Please feel free to voice your opinions. I don't know if you have anything else to add, Lydia? So please share your comments in the microphones. Who would like to break the ice? You can also ask questions based on what you've heard. Gilles Pronovo. I think this calls on our capacity to provide long-term reliable data. This is a very wide mandate. We have to reflect on the fundamental issues. Large data collection institutions have to question their practices, but also researchers must do the same. Also, research themes will have to deal with these knowledge challenges. Many organizations and observatories work in related fields. Institutional collaboration and international collaboration is therefore even more important. It's the same challenge, but at the global scale. Do you have a message of hope, as you did yesterday? We've mentioned at several occasions this necessity for synergies from statistical agencies, but also from local organizations, civil society organizations as well, in order to define a specific set of needs on what we know, and also move upstream and find new ways to figure out ways to collect the data we're missing. I'd like to come back to associations of producers, of artists, and representatives. We are now in an age where networks are important. And these actors are far from what the observatory can be. I don't want to speak on behalf of other countries, but we are in a situation in which we are determined by technical aspects that are taking up all the space, whereas we were usually in a mindset of creation and products. Now, networks are over-determining our reality. We have issues with following networks. Contrary to the European systems that might have a larger legal edge than what we can witness here. It's as if this network era or age falls beyond our grasp. What I've mentioned today can be declined in different realms. I don't mean necessarily areas of actions for the observatories or for the organizations here in Quebec. UIS has carried out a lot of work. In Lydia's presentation, we saw the relationships that she established with other organizations and also classification systems to make sure that traditional statistics evolve compared to private statistics that we are trying to obtain. We've been talking about the relationship between public and private statistics. I'd like your opinion on these relations. Go ahead. Mathias. I'm part of the Canadian Commission for UNESCO. What I take away from the presentations this morning is that there's a certain call to collaboration for large regional groups. We could see this on behalf of the EU, and we will see the same call for collaboration in other regional groups, such as in Asia, Latin America. This cooperation calls these regional groups, but also the member states. If I understood correctly, during Michelle Riou's presentation and her colleague Destiny's presentation, if departments, ministries, sectors start talking among each other, the education departments and the culture departments start talking with each other and determine how contents can be transferred from one department to another. And the usage of this content can lead to something new. That's what we can do at the small scale. At the large scale, let's look at the calling of our Minister of Canadian Heritage. Let's look at the contents of Canadian culture. I've been following these files for many years, and I've seldomly heard a minister tell us directly, we want to know what you want to see as content, what we call the Canadian digital content. We're trying to generate part of this content, but we're not generating much. I believe that cooperation at the government level, but also at the municipal level, cities that will become the next large cultural production centers, I believe cooperation will become that much more important. Let's wait to hear the presentations this afternoon, especially on the compensation for creators, with everything that has been said from our colleagues of the EU. I believe we will see the strategies that we can put forward after this afternoon's presentation. Yes, yesterday Someone made a comment that made me smile comparing Europe to a mammoth. But we could say the same thing about the GAFAs. There's a certain concern that stems from our incapacity to discuss collectively and seriously with them. I've worked for a long time in editing, and Amazon has completely changed the business model by coming up with a tool that took away market shares from editors here and also editors in Europe and in France. We had no possibility of communicating with Amazon aside from computer processes that were extremely uncomfortable and often inefficient. One day, I decided to take the plane to go visit Amazon in Seattle without an appointment, without knowing where to go, because at the time, Amazon was spread over 10 sites. And one day, I was able to obtain a meeting with a person at Amazon that was in charge of the book industry in Quebec. And that's when I noticed to what extent there were men and women behind these companies that are extremely difficult to approach. Therefore, today we talk about information statistics, big data. We are being intimidated with these buzzwords, but there are people that manage this on a daily basis. And since these companies have taken so much room through obscure mechanisms and have taken so much room in markets that are hard to grasp, these companies are able to take a large market share. We have trouble understanding their exact effect, but we can see their effects by seeing some players that disappear. If Mr. Chantepie suggests that we should come together, if the actors in the area say, well, we can't act because we have different interests within our sectors, we need the support from governments, from decision makers, we need the support from international organizations as well. I do agree with Mr. Chantepie in that sense. We need an agreement between sector stakeholders. We need agreements with governments and supra-governments to be able to negotiate with the new mega actors in this new reality in order for local markets not to be crushed by global markets. The global markets are not concerned today with local markets. Their only concern is to take up more market shares than they already have. There are men and women that we can meet in person. The issue with Europe is that there's high turnover in these positions. There's not a lot of continuity in management. In the past 10 years, the turnover is about one person that fills one position for 1 year. But we've seen the struggle between Europe and Google. We've seen people from Google that had to speak publicly. And the people that speak publicly are not only people that speak publicly, but rather Google that speaks publicly. And this involves the people and the company. Yesterday we had a presentation by Jed Schneiderman. I'm not sure if he's here in the room. I think he has left for Toronto. He was one of the only speakers that worked for the private sector. He worked for MTV, Bell. And as you say, men and women are behind these companies. But what would be the incentive to force these large players to share the information? You are correct by saying that they already have this information. And you have this humanist approach to go see them one by one to discover that there are people behind these large corporations, even though they try to pretend otherwise. Behind these multinational groups, there are national groups that might seem large at the national scale, but are still powerless. Walmart, for example, was innovator and destructor, if we go back to the analogy of destructive creation. What is the company that hurts the most Walmart? That's Amazon. No later than this morning in the newspaper, we've seen the boss of TVA that had to answer to some of the inquiries of the government. This is a struggle between the private sector, the public sector, between two large players, that is CBC and TVA. But within this market, none of the large players is confronted with these large multinational players that aren't playing the same game, as we say. So there are relayers within each market, without being that humanistic, that there are interests for small, medium, and large-sized players in a local market to collaborate with their regulators to make sure that there remains a certain level of power at the local level. In this case, we could talk about retail industry. A large retail store has made a request to the government and asked the government, why should I pay taxes at several levels, whereas consumers can buy articles and items online, and these companies don't have to pay taxes.
You opened the door to me on the issue on GAFA and the black box. There are perhaps some trails. I'm not saying that it's easy, but there are some trails that haven't been mentioned. I already talked that I traveled to New York at Google 2 weeks ago at EDEX. They are present there, and they are talking about exchange standards and transmission standards downstream and upstream. There are partners like Spotify, Google, Amazon. So there is here a floor where you can talk with them about the transmission of information. And were they open? Yes, certainly. Which brings me to the second point. It is that they have a lot of claims against them because they have some work, because they have there is a lack of transparency in accounting, in putting them into account and Spotify, and there is, for example, a class action lawsuit against them. Suddenly, it is the program to try to develop internally an area of responsibility and perhaps a data bank. They are all trying to reinvent the wheel. They want to have a global data bank of work internally to try to avoid being taken the hand in the pocket, and there's some global initiative that are not ambitious enough, and where all the users have the same problem of the distribution of fees or rights, and they have to face the music too. They developed a little bit in the wild way, like a lot of startups, that they have cut corners, but now they've been caught, and so we have to look into this. Something else, there is also the Filtered Music International Initiative that is trying to certify services of the value chain of music to give them a competitive advantage. But among the criteria of certification, there will be some criteria that have to do with transparency. So this is a non-government approach, but this is perhaps a non-government approach that could bring some oxygen to our debate of today. Si j'y en ai. Robert? I was asking a question by preparing this intervention. I was wondering the questions about regulation, about independent audiovisual regulation, and the MON, the which and the statistical world, and I was wondering, in terms of organization and governance, the evolution of audiovisual, European audiovisual has led about 2 or 3 years ago to intensify the networking, creating common groups, and it was done specifically on the fact that the activity got internationalized with the intervention of global groups, and they decided to understand an understanding of data that exceeded the natural environment of each of the actors. And I wanted to know if in statistical analysis, has there been some thought given on the networking of exchange of good practices, of common characteristic in financing political independence, and what else, and common actions on mode of interventions at a key moment. Like, for example, in Europe, we are at a key moment in Europe, which is the review of a directive. And so it is really a moment where there has been a lot of invitations to cooperate in public consultation. So I was wondering if an analogy to the world that is mine has some thought been given to something similar between the various stakeholders in this area. For the nations, for the United Nations, I can talk about accountability. There is a group that comprises the public area, the private areas, and trying to review the common the traditional borders, and trying to work with various actors, e-commerce, the private corporation, Visa, and see what we can do. So this is a huge exploratory work that is being done. There's a lot of initiatives being on the international level or national level. And in culture, we talked about it yesterday, perhaps we should get closer to these initiatives that are working in the digital field to try to see how we can learn more and integrate the components so that we can have that information. And also, in a convention, I don't know if you want to say something. She was talking about the directives, operational directives, and talking, even the report of Dissens, a big part was devoted to the good practices in the cultural sphere. And it's very important to collect this information and to give it so that the countries can learn from each other. In Europe, we had lots of examples. We have the example of Belgium, but this is a very important way of informing and say what exists, and it could even inspire us. One last question. It's more a comment. To add to what was said the last question, and I can only approve your comment that says that culture have to get closer to the tables of negotiation and approach those places where we're talking about big data, because the data is at the crux of digital models. If culture does not learn, or if the creators at the basis of the model do not learn what the data is, well, what's the point? And if they do not master their own data, well, there is a distortion. There's going to be a constant distortion that we're going to try to fill through regulation, but we'll never achieve it. And where we should look at, and I know this is where the last question has really impressed me, it is opening and transparency. There are some organizations in the world that are fighting for openness and transparency of data, because some openness is necessary in trade or in the public good. So, for example, there are a lot of foundations, there are a lot of initiatives, and I'm sure that there are also some in many organizations that are connected to the United Nations, because and for example, the ODCE. There are a lot of initiatives, and financially, we are interested in data for accountability, but we could have some interest culturally. Of course, there are some tensions when you are publicizing data because it's threatening. It can shake some infrastructure. It can shake some ecosystems because they control the information, but it is necessary. If we do not do this, and if we are not using the means that we already have to act on the legislative sphere, on a data access, and if you're not searching some balance in the information through the acquisition of data, this is a problem. So we have to get there and exist. There are some models. There are, for example, financial models, and we're trying to see how certain systems are being built. Some system of confidence validation exists. Crypto money with Bitcoin. This works on data to inform all stakeholders when there are some transactions or exchanges or trading, and we have to really work on what is being done when you are a culture actor, and when we frame a cultural policy, we have to be able to position ourselves and use the same data. Well, then we should be able to negotiate on an even playing field with those mammoths. But let's not forget that the mammoths, the woolly mammoth, disappeared 18,000 years ago. So, thank you. I think that for me this is what's the most important, because otherwise we're going to try to be on the defensive all the time. We're also always going to be in a reactive mode, trying to protect ourselves. Thank you. André, want to say something?
All right, thanks. Merci. I've been thinking about this sort of new digital statistics, of digital cultural statistics, and I think a number of other areas are going through this discussion. Like if I'm thinking of academic world, is the digital humanities a big thing? And it's not about making the same research questions with new tools. It's actually about coming up with new research questions. And one example we use with our students is as new technology changes. For instance, we have now the mobile phones. It's silly to try to think about how long do you call on your phone, because this mobile phone has become much more than a calling instrument. I mean, it's a photography, it's a camera, is to send messages. So because the use has changed, it's really an opportunity to ask completely new questions. And if I go back then to the digital culture stats, I will really embrace this opportunity to renew cultural statistics. And since a number of the speakers have mentioned, culture has now the possibility of being digitally present everywhere. Multitasking, listening to music while, or watching films in 5 devices, and so on. So perhaps I'll be very much interested in this new concept of, okay, what's culture good for? Or what does culture do in our lives? And go further and think of, for instance, things like what does it do with identity? What does it do with happiness? What does it do with other, perhaps more complex things to measure? But just because now we have this big data and this access to it's an excuse to really, I'll make sure, I guess, lunch is coming. So I really will call to expand this notion of what's cultural statistics and really rethink and reinvent the potential of explaining the value of culture in life. Something.
Thank you.
Oui, ce sera ma toute dernière intervention.
My last intervention here. Two things. I agree with what has been said on the necessity of having a human relationship. It is that my experience at the observatory has buttressed this, the necessity to have some reports with private or public groups. This is what we did in Arabic countries. The interpersonal cooperation is very important. But this being said, let's not try to build a picture, too rosy picture. The access to data it is a sector of data on for example on video that is working with the studio of Hollywood. We didn't talk a lot about them. They're telling me that in contracts and iTunes and the Hollywood studios, the studios have insisted to keep the property of the metadata, which they haven't done for music, and it's this experience of the music that makes that they wanted to keep the property of those data. So even if Netflix or iTunes, if you want to cooperate behind, there are some stakeholders, and we know that they are very, very powerful, who do not want to communicate. So this problem is historic. And also, I did not answer the remark on protectionism or the possible protectionism in Europe. This is legally quite complicated, and also on reality of markets, there are some important problems in Europe or in the European Union between the new member countries and the new countries of Eastern Europe that have joined. The programming of Eastern Europe represented 1 or 2% of the market in the European Union, and this brings me to a conclusion on the fact that here we didn't talk a lot about it. We broached it, but the access to production coming from emerging countries, and I wanted to work on collaboration. But in the work of the Observatoire Européen de l'Audiovisuel, some things can be very useful for emerging countries. Especially, we did a study on the circulation of films from third countries in the European market, and it was showing that the co-productions was the best way of accessing the markets, and I believe that this dimension of collaboration with emerging countries, we should not forget it. We didn't cover it here because the difficulty of access to information is the same for developed countries in Europe, but we should not forget this dimension. Thank you very much. Well, we're going to eat. We're all hungry. Before we adjourn, I would like to thank Lange. I cannot say it publicly, and who has contributed, sitting on our scientific committee, and he contributed to the selection and to the invitation of certain guest speakers. Some of them came, some others did not come. And André, I think that you did an excellent job with us, and it is a type of collaboration that you are evoking, and the personal relations contribute to moving forward. We're an example with a network, and it is true that you see that it is all a question of individual in organizations that really decide to roll up their sleeves and cooperate and do things at levels that were not done in the past. So thank you very much, André, and enjoy your lunch. Yeah, we are reconvening on this message of hope. We are reconvening at 1:30.